our bestie, David Hollis.
Bruh.
If you remember correctly, if you've been following the lore of Dave Hollis and his life and his love life, Dave and Heidi Powell, his longtime girlfriend of 2 years, they have broken up. Heidi and Dave Hollis have broken up. He's spoken about it briefly on his Instagram stories, but I was promised that in this podcast, he addresses it, which makes sense because it is titled, You Are Worthy of Unconditional Love. I don't know if the insinuation is that Heidi did not unconditionally love him, but we'll find out as we go. So he is going to talk about church. Actually, ironically, Jen Hatmaker's church, or old, she doesn't go there anymore, I guess, but the church that she started, I believe, is the church that he is attending these days. And I hadn't heard about church in a couple of years. And now that him and Heidi are on the fritz, are splits, he is back in church. He's back in the pews, people. So here we go. I'm excited to hear all the deets.
I thought I'd throw a Tuesday episode up. I'm sitting, looking out over the back patio. It's the calm before the storm. Kids coming back tomorrow. But he's
the captain. And I see, yes, and I did address it last time. Dave apparently does have a Hinge profile, and the update since the last time I talked about his Hinge profile is that it's been verified. So, I mean, allegedly, I don't know. I've never seen it with my two eyes. I've only seen screenshots. So of course, those could be doctored, but according to Reddit, Dave has a verified Hinge account now. So it appears that it is truly his Hinge account. So it looks like him and Heidi are broken up and he is back on the dating scene and can't wait to see what that produces.
Okay. A really interesting breakthrough on the way home from church. And I thought I would share a little of how me crying through a sermon is reminding me of what parts of me are still being healed. As a little disclaimer coming in, I do reference going to church. I do talk about some things that happened inside of this sermon, but this episode is as much for someone who believes like I do as it is for someone who doesn't. I'm not going to try and decipher biblical texts or even convince you to try to come to church. So if you're up for a little bit of a look into my mind and the way that...
I think he does have a future potentially in a church setting. He would fit in so great at like a, new wave Hillsong, well, maybe not Hillsong, maybe like a Hillsong wannabe church where you just talk about your life experiences and how they relate to the biblical text, because that's what he basically does. That's what Rachel basically does too, just now without the Christian only element, because I think they wanted to diversify their, customer base. But now that he's sort of failed at that, he can just, niche down again.
Is happening, and the way that sometimes hearing a certain message allows you access to the parts of you that you need to still work on, then this episode's for you. Welcome to Rise Together. My name's Dave Hollis. I'm the host of this show where we're going to hopefully have you feeling a little more normal in this, the human experience. Maybe see yourself even.
Can you imagine being a mediocre man and thinking that your ramblings and blabblings about your life is helping people deal with the human experience? Can you imagine just the audacity that requires? Some
of the stories that are told, or have your appreciation of what it means to be human expanded by someone who's come on as a guest who's had a different life experience. In all of it,
you mean everyone other?
All the feels. This kind of feels in the same way that you're probably not meant to go grocery shopping when you're hungry. I'm not sure that you're meant to podcast when you are feeling super emotional. So this could end up being garbage, may not even air, but I was just driving home. I can't stop thinking about the experience of this service. So I thought I'd come on and record a little bonus episode, giving you a little bit of my thoughts on feeling all the feels. We were in service today. I have been going to this church for, 5 years now, called Austin New Church. And I haven't been in the building as often as I have been attending online since the pandemic.
Sure.
But I have
That's
made
what I say too.
As a list of things that, hey, I want to try and have happen in my life in 2023. And I keep coming back. Man, I've talked about it like a broken record, but like building real community in Austin is one of those things that like I just want to do and I need to do so badly. And I am hoping that showing up in person and connecting with people in a building is going to be something of a conduit to the creation of some real.
I think that's a good idea. Honestly, for him, just, following his story, I think that is much more a healthy route than flying to Arizona every 3 days and bringing your kids along for the ride. So, in the relation to what he's been doing since the divorce, I think this is a much more healthy approach. So love him or hate him, we got to give him credit when it's due. So good job, Dave, for the growth here.
So I've been going to church in person again for a while, and I'm feeling good about it. But I also have this very interesting thing that has happened now a couple of different times in a row where something will come up in the service and it will create a reaction of tears. And I can't, I've been, journaling about this and thinking about it both on the drives there and back and whatever else. I haven't been able to totally put my finger on it. And then as I was coming home from church today, I felt like I had something of a breakthrough. So in the beginning of the service, in a way that I don't think I've ever seen done in church, our pastor, my buddy, Jason Morris, such a good friend, that guy who at the beginning of divorce sent me that same text every single day for 8-9 weeks in a row. What small piece of sadness can I hold for you today? Such a good man. He, after some of the worship was done and after there were some announcements made, he opened up an open mic to allow people in the congregation to talk about a topic that he placed up for discussion. And the conversation was anger or frustration or processing the hard feelings that are associated with what.
The only church I've ever gone to is a Catholic church, and the idea of having an open mic at a Catholic church service, at least in my own experience, unbelievable. It's so interesting how many different types of Christians there are.
And it feels like at times to walk into this space, especially if you've had a circumstance that was not ideal earlier in your faith walk because of some of the maybe programmatic or dogmatic ways that a certain congregation told you as a woman that you had a place or didn't have a place, or as a person in the LGBTQ community that you had or didn't have a place, or whatever it might be. And the message the week prior was about how historically women hadn't been afforded as much a space to speak or presence in the church, and let's unpack the feelings around that and what it might mean in a world today that is hopefully affording more space and more, hands up for women standing on stages and living fully into who they are. And so he'd opened up this open mic for people to talk about how
I zone out when he talks. I'm sorry.
They've experienced in the church creates interesting feelings today as they sit in it. And there was something about hearing the stories of these normal people who had a life where someone, something, some structure, some pressure, some current in society telling them a certain way that they had to be, and how it warped a little bit of how they felt that they had access to God, or they had access to being all of who they knew they were put on this planet to be.
Okay, whatever, Dave. Hold on. We got an emergency. You thought the hat from Rachel, the life coach, spiritual coach that was in debt was bad? Wait till you see Jason, the pastor he's talking about. He's like, hey guys, it's headshot day. Okay, just, we want to show that this church is warm and inviting. So, okay, Trey's like, all right, you got it. I'm going to smile. Stephanie's like, you got it. I'm going to look off camera just a little bit, but I have a warmness. Jason's like, who? Jesus who? I'm busy. So this is his buddy, Jason, his best friend. He was raised in a missionary family in central Mexico in the 80s and 90s. After high school and a short degree in practical theology, Allison and I married and returned to continue the work I'd been involved in for years. Music and youth ministry were my first love, but nowhere near as compelling to me as preaching and pastoring. So he came back to the States to finish university and pursue a master's of divinity from Northern Theological Seminary near Chicago. After graduating, I joined the staff of a mega church in Houston. I think it's Joel Osteen's, probably. But that was just a stop along the way until I found my dream church, ANC, not to be confused with AMC movie theaters. That is a non-religious theater. I'm just kidding. That's not what it says. I am progressive by nature and Wesleyan by choice. Endlessly inquisitive and curious. I love to run. Guess he's not too tall. Read and ride motorcycles to recenter and rest. Oh my gosh. He loves to run, read, and ride motorcycles to recenter and rest. Roar, 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 roar. I'm grateful that ANC allows me to give myself entirely to the art and craft of preaching and teaching. But he cannot be bothered with looking into the camera for the picture. Okay, just so we all know who Jason is. Good idea, JB. Thank you. Okay, back to it, baby.
Because of some of what was sold to them or told to them. And it was super emotional. I started crying maybe 12 minutes into this hour and 15-minute service. I did not stop until I got into my car.
Sorry.
And I ended up posting a little bit about it, in part because of the significance of the message that was delivered after this open mic opportunity. I had plenty of people saying, oh, that's the Holy Spirit. That's like what happens when you are having something worked out. And now I've been sitting with, well, what was being worked out in me that this thing, I think there's some natural empathy for hearing someone else's story and wishing that, man, it hadn't had to have been that way. But I knew there was something else that was happening.
I knew it wasn't that I had empathy for someone else. It was because I needed to work something out in myself and then tell you about it and make money from it. That's the real reason I was feeling empathy.
I happen to be an empath myself.
And I was like, what is being worked out? What's the Holy Spirit? What's God working out in me? The message itself was about the Beatitudes. Blessed are the, right? All of the message that exists there at the beginning of the, I want to say it's the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus ultimately delivers. The crux of the conversation was this idea where he's trying to lay out the Beatitudes and make sure that you're not mistaking them as prerequisites of how you have to be to attain access to God's love.
Huh?
Now, by the way, if you're listening to this and you're not a religious person or you're not into church or you're not even into God, just stick with me for a sec, because this is not going to be me trying to unpack a biblical text. This is not going to even be me trying to preach or convert you into showing up at my church on Sunday. The conversation, though, about the prerequisites of what you have to do to be, quote unquote, good enough for God's love is a ridiculous idea in and of itself, because there are none. You are, like I am, worthy of the receipt of God's love right now before you do a single thing.
I feel misled. This is him preaching 100% to me about going to church. You can't change my mind about it. He sent 25 caveats. They have all proven to be not true so far. I feel very influenced right now.
The reality in my own journey and what I now can see, having thought about it and done a little journaling about it after I got home, the reason why I cried for 58 minutes of an hour, 15-minute service is that the idea that I am good and worthy before I do anything comes back to and is connected to a core wound of mine that has not yet fully healed. Dave. And if you are someone who feels like your goodness...
If you've listened to the amount of Dave Hollis content that I've listened to, which if you watch this channel, we've listened to the same, essentially. He has talked about this 77,000 times. How is this a new revelation at this point? He's told this story. Rachel's told this exact story. I thought I was only going to get love if I scored a score in the soccer game, if I scored a goal in the soccer game, if I, memorized the Bible. We've heard this exact thing 75 times. I don't know how, he's run out of content, that's obvious, but why present it as a new idea every single time, like a revelation? Unless he's just totally in denial, we understand you need to not seek validation from strangers as you have a podcast about needing validation.
worthiness or you're deserving of love is a thing that comes with a contingency that you check certain boxes or do certain things or be a certain way. As far as God's concerned, first and foremost, his love comes without any conditions needing to be satisfied. And thank goodness for that. Gosh.
Thank God for that.
Me, I've talked about it a few times on the show. God, I can feel like the emotion in my voice is making it tremble. I got to just take a breath. The way I was brought up.
God, Dave.
All right. I have two
This is a hard listen.
extraordinary parents. They are salt of the earth. They raised me in a really great home that was, very religious, had a lot of rules. But I also happened to, in birth order, be the oldest of 4 kids, where those 4 kids were born in like 6.5 years, like right on top of each other. So there were just a lot of kids in the house as I was growing up.
Was there 1,000 kids?
It's okay to cry.
And in some ways, because of the way that our very strict religious household was organized, there was a super clear line of this is good and this is bad. This is right. This is wrong. Here's how you go to heaven. Here's how you go to hell. And it was pretty binary. And your hope, I shouldn't say your hope, but the hope of the house was be good, be right, go to heaven. And so in the combo platter of that as a kind of fixture of our home and the way that birth order for me had me attempting to show that I was good when there was a lot of chaos running around, the thing that I turned to as an access point for love was achievement. I will go and get good grades and score the most goals and memorize the most Bible verses and all the things.
I swear I did not listen to this part already of this podcast. That is his example every single time. I know that by memory now what his examples are for love. That's how much this story has been told.
So that you will see me, and that in seeing me do good, you will acknowledge me with the love I crave from you. And
isn't this, I could be speaking because I have the same issue, but I feel like this is every child's experience. Like you just want your parents to be proud of you at all times. So that's why you do things in life to make them proud. And whether they reciprocate that or not depends on if you have good parents or not. I don't know, but he seems to think this is a unique to him thing.
God, there were so many good things that came out of that programming when it came to it creating a drive in me and an ambition in me. And certainly I built a nice career and helped build some nice things inside of companies. But that double-edged sword of if I perform, if I achieve, then I will get love has a super dark side that in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've been having to do so much work to try and unlearn that I have to do anything in order to be worthy of receiving love in the first place. And guess what? Like, it's not just about achievement for me. There are things that ultimately then tip into some of what has been unhealthy relationship patterns for me that look more like codependence than they look like showing up, that look like there's more a kind of transactional nature to the receipt of love than there is love just being shared back and forth without thinking about like receipts, as it were. I know when I was working at Disney, there were plenty of times where I had access to a handful of things that were so cool, right? Like going to a movie premiere or getting passes into Disneyland or whatever. And there was some part of this maladaptive thinking that I picked up as a child that had me trying to put my finger on the scale of my own friendships that, hey, be friends with me. Not necessarily because I, in and of myself, am worthy of and am a good friend, but if you're friends with me, you also can get a free pass into Disneyland, or I might be able to bring you to a movie premiere. Like, I was trying to kind of tip the scales because of some insecurity or because of...
Again, doesn't everyone sort of deal with this? Like, what do you offer your fellow man? Like, the kid who's got the trampoline growing up is probably going to be more popular than the kid that, you know, doesn't have new clothes. Like that's just again, like a not life's not fair type of scenario that you have to work through in some way. I don't know. I think he really thinks that this is a Dave Hollis problem, that he's explaining it some, you know, like very unique and helpful way. It's like, this is sort of everyone's experience. And maybe again, like I suffer with this and deal with it. So I'm just thinking my experience is also common. But I mean, I feel like I've talked to people and it's like, what do you have to offer in a romantic relationship? What do you have to offer in a friendship? That's always sort of like part of the game. Yeah, it sucks, but I mean, that's what we're all sort of trying to weigh all the time.
Some part of how I learned how to be loved, that if I could offer this gift with purchase, then I reduce the chances of being rejected, or I reduce the chances of not being loved back. And there were plenty of things that existed in my marriage that were byproducts of that. I jumped so quickly into relationship with Heidi, a thing that I freaking love. I'm so grateful for, you know, every single thing that came in that relationship.
So much so that we broke up.
As much as I've looked for the book that says, you know, after a 16-year marriage, you should run immediately into a new relationship, it doesn't exist. And don't worry, I'm not going to write it. But part of...
Okay, sir, you already wrote that book. It's called Built Through Courage, and it literally has Heidi in a picture in one of the chapters. So you already wrote that book where the advice was, yeah, go for this. Nothing wrong, nothing bad about what I'm doing currently here. I've actually solved all my problems, and I can change your life too by you reading this book. That was Built Through Courage's entire premise, just FYI.
What happens when you move quickly from one relationship to the next is that you don't get to do the investigative reporting on what of the things that you've done that aren't ideal in connection or in codependence, and you just bring those same patterns into the next relationship. And so I find myself now,
True.
you know, trying to spend a little bit more time. Dave, spend some time.
Dave.
Doing the investigative work to understand what
Talking
these
about
patterns
peace?
are, or what this thinking is, and deconstruct it so that I can heal some of that core wound. So I've said the word core wound a couple of times. You know, as much as Heidi and I aren't dating anymore, we're still working together in a variety of capacities. Among them is this really cool mastermind that we have inside of the fitness community we run.
Inside of.
And this last week, she was teaching on this idea of core wounds. I'm going to bring it back to my church.
Heidi, if you're watching, we all want you to get better. As much as we're snarking on you and we've criticized you in the past, we want you, and I'm speaking for all of us in this community that's here. We don't wish ill on any of these people. I'm going to speak for all of us as people. Now, your content can be cringe. I don't think Dave, Rachel, or Heidi should be charging money to give advice, because I don't think that they have any sort of special advice over anyone else in this world, at least what they've chosen to speak about and teach on. I feel badly for what Heidi's going through right now, just based on her Instagram, based on some of the ways she's been posting, and I hate to say this because I know it's judgmental and it's none of my business, but based on the way she looks right now, it looks to me as an outsider, or someone who's been on her account a lot in the last couple of years, like she's lost a lot of weight, and I know she's been open about her struggles with eating disorder. I worry for her health right now. The fact that she's teaching people on the internet for money about core wounds and how to deal with that is ridiculous to me. And the fact that he's promoting it as if this is like a totally normal, great thing that should be happening just shows that he's not quite on the reality train that I would prefer him to be on personally. Now, that's the last thing I'll say about it for now, but I don't know. This is all unhealthy to me.
Epiphany at the end of this. But we were talking about core wounds, and we were introducing this idea because if you can understand what it is that you have as a core wound, you understand why you do almost everything you do, period. I mean, it sometimes informs the good things you do, but it also sometimes informs the bad things you do. And so the questions that we were asking this group are the questions that I've been asking myself in the aftermath of this church service today, but also in the last year's worth of time. And it's the question I'd ask you today as well, which is, do you have a sense of, do you have a handle at all on what your core wound is? Now, for a lot of us, like a core wound is something that happens when we're young, right? So like I can go back, and for me, it's like a 7-year-old version of me who is trying so badly to be seen in a house with now 3 small kids by doing everything he can to be the best, the perfect, the shiniest object of them all, because I am desperate to be seen and be loved. And the times when I didn't have access to the love that I craved, because I'm sure there were other things that were happening, like feeding and taking care of 3 other small babies in the house, it triggered something of a wound that said, you just got to work harder. You just got to work harder. You got to push more. You got to achieve something greater. You have to become something bigger, because you're not big enough right now. And in the absence of being big, this smallness is why you're not getting love. So like my core wound goes back to this thing that existed inside of this pretty discrete window of my life, but then has these like rippling echoes of I'm not worthy, or I'm not enough as I am on my own, or I'm not lovable if I don't sweeten the pot with some kind of gift with purchase. Like those things are all this byproduct of that wound that existed then. And so the work that I have, and I think the work that anybody ends up having, is to go back and understand what the heck that wound actually is, why that wound actually existed, and then find some ways to deconstruct it or make some of the lies that come in it completely unbelievable because of some of the truths that you now know about yourself, about your world, about your God, whatever it might end up being.
Okay, we get it, Dave. You're a Christian. My God. I mean, I guess, but I think also sometimes people think the critical wound that you have is one thing, and in reality, it's another thing, because you're just unable to look at it yourself in that way, critically and without bias. And I would say, I hope he says here, and the best way to do this is through therapy. That is a way that you can, work with a professional on these major issues, because doing it alone sucks, and having a community is wonderful, and having someone with a degree that can help you in a way, and hopefully you can afford it, which is the biggest hurdle I know for mental health care. But if you can do it that way, and you're not alone, and there are ways to figure this stuff out, but we'll see what he says.
And so if you have a core wound of that you're not worthy, like the work that you end up having is to find those examples of your worthiness that are present all around you every day.
Yeah. Okay. I obviously feel that way all the time, that I'm not worthy. And I know that my wound comes from like my parents and all that, like feeling like I need to perform and whatever. I feel very similar in a lot of ways to them, but from a low income perspective, probably similar more to Rachel in her upbringing. But I've been in therapy for coming up on 3 years now, and I'm still working on these issues. It takes a lot. It's not just, I know intellectually that I'm okay and all these things are fine. It's much, much, for me at least, deeper than that. And it takes so much. I mean, he's obviously not over his wounds. He's going to say, I figured it out by identifying it. If identifying the problem was the problem, every abusive situation, every, horrible marriage would be immediately divorced and moved on from and escaped out of and all that. It's so much deeper than that. And it just shows that you're someone who's not there yet to think that this is how it works.
And It's not a thing, by the way, that like, I'll identify it on a Thursday afternoon, and by Saturday morning, that wound will be healed. No.
Okay, good.
Like you're going to go on a healing journey that's potentially going to take time. But when you're able to start that journey, then you actually give yourself this glimmer of hope, this possibility that the way that you've always almost automatically, like reflexively responded to things is something that you can interrupt because you now have some new information and a different way of thinking about who you are and why you do what you do that'll have you making a different kind of choice.
Maybe.
I've been having this conversation in therapy for about 2 years now. I've been really doing a ton of work on this idea of core wound for at least 6 months.
Okay,
and I
good.
still catch myself almost every day doing something that I'm like, holy goodness, Dave, quit feeding into that insecure thing that existed inside of you when you were 7. You are
Holy goodness. I got to soundbite that too.
7 any longer. At the same time, what I've had to also really do, and I would encourage anyone who does any exploration around core wounds to also do, I have had to develop a massive amount of compassion for the 7-year-old needs that still exist inside of my body. Because that little boy who was desperate to be loved is still there, hands open, asking to have some of his experience honored. And so I tended to be a pretty tough judge of myself, and tough judgment is the last thing that the 7-year-old version of me who's still hurting needs. He just wants to be seen. He wants to have those feelings honored and acknowledged, and he wants to be made to feel safe. And so that, it takes some self-awareness, but also just a massive, massive amount of compassion. So the 3 things that I would suggest that, anyone try to do if you want to do some work on your core wound, this is what's been helpful for me. The first thing that you have to do is name it, right? Like, just take some time to actually acknowledge, oh, this is my core wound. This is why it exists. This is what it feels like. These are the patterns that it's created. Here are some of the choices that I've made because of the way that this wound is still present and not fully healed. But you name it. The second thing is that you really take notice of how it controls you to this point. You spend time actually seeing how it's been present in your current day life. Right? How does the fact that you haven't fully addressed or haven't fully acknowledged or haven't fully honored that this wound exists, how does it happen to show up in your life with your decisions? How does it make your body feel? If, like a lot of times,
Aroused.
when I am feeling anxious, it's because I'm wildly out of alignment with something that my core wound is begging me to pay attention to. And so the more that you can be aware of, okay, how does it present in my body? Does it raise my blood pressure? Does it make me sweat? Does it make me get a stomach butterfly? Does it, like, whatever it ends up being, the more that you can really take notice to how it controls you, the more that you're going to be able to take the third step, which is how you address it when that voice starts to speak. So the third thing you need to do, make a plan to address your inner wounded voice, right? Knowing that you've got the issue or knowing that you're working through the healing, like, that's the first thing. There's power in just the knowledge of that. But it also requires that you're going to be kind of tactical about how you want to try and actually attend to the wound. Now, for me, sometimes my tactical attending is having a conversation.
Is it attend? I mean, I'm just curious. I'm not trying to make fun of him for this, but like, is it? I thought it was tending, not attending the wound. Anyone have insights?
With my therapist. Sometimes it's journaling. Sometimes it's praying. Today, it was spending time in church because there was a healing salve that was delivered in the midst of a sermon about the prerequisites of me being lovable, as in there are none. That was the thing that my 7-year-old needed to hear more than anything. But whatever it is, you just got to make a plan. And slowly but surely, you'll get to chip away at this thing and start to feel better. The work is not easy. I will tell you this, I want to be like very clear that my core wound, like the story of like me desiring to be loved by a great mom and dad who happen to have kids back to back, may seem like the highest class problems to have a wound that I am recovering from relative to what you've been through. And I don't want to diminish any of what you've been through. I want to honor it for sure. But also in saying that, some of the wounds that might exist, especially if you grew up in a physically or emotionally abusive household, if you're coming out of anything that has like deep trauma or massive amounts of grief, there's going to be extra excavating. It's going to take.
This is giving me the vibes of, I read an article about trauma, and let me tell you how to fix your deep wounds of your life. I'm going to hack. I have a hack for you. Trauma hack. Just name it and deal with it. Trauma is in a mindset. I'm struggling. I don't care what he's saying. This is, again, just like repeated information delivered. Like, it's like secondhand advice given from someone who has not done the healing work yet to actually address the issues that they're struggling with. Given that this is in a podcast, it's like as if he has an addiction to podcasting. He's telling you he's got an addiction to podcasting, and let me explain how I'm, fixing that by podcasting it to you. It makes no sense. Exactly what he's saying is what he's doing right now. So how can I trust his, expertise, which is none?
Tenderness, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take compassion. But as you're able to chip away at it, it's going to produce healing. You're going to become more whole. And I am on this journey of wholeness. Like, I'm closer to whole than I've ever been. And there's still.
The fuck does that mean? Journey to wholeness? I'm closer to wholeness than I've ever been. What does that mean? That is a meaningless phrase. And I feel like that is him searching for perfection. Now he's changed perfect into whole. And you're still after the same thing. Dave, this to me is reading that you have the same issue, you are changing up the vocab. It's the same problem. It's like how people get in relationships. They think, oh, it was my ex-husband and I, he was the problem. And then you get into a relationship with a very similar guy the next time. And it's like, why do I keep having this same problem? It's like, because it's you. You haven't dealt with you yet. And it's like he's doing the same thing. Like, oh, I used to think I had to be perfect. Now I have to be whole. Is that not obvious? Listen to this back critically, please, for all of our sakes, and don't publish it again.
Where I break into tears and wish that it wasn't so hard to have to confront all of the feelings all of the time. And yet, we are. So when I bring it back to the church service, and what the heck was actually happening while I'm crying uncontrollably in the back of a church with a man who was a new attendee who I was happy to meet, who also was wearing a cowboy hat the entire time. There's no shade being thrown here, just an admirer of both his hat and the fact that he was here for the first time. I just want to also, sidebar, not related, apologize to everyone I've ever sat in front of at any public gathering ever as a 6'4" man. I just got a dose of my own medicine, and I had never experienced it before. But back to church. Why was I crying in the back of this church?
He's too tall to attend church. He's too tall to church. He's too tall to pray in a group setting.
I was crying tears of healing.
Oh.
I was crying tears of hearing a thing.
Come on,
that
Dave.
my 7-year-old wound, my 7-year-old version of me,
this is whoever forced this upon us, and by us I mean collectively, me and you watching. This is a rough listen. This is bad.
Wants to be loved so badly he thinks he has to hustle to be lovable. It was a remedy.
You know what I think? And maybe he's addressing this on his own. He doesn't want to publicly say it. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. What I think is the most painful thing that he needs to confront is that Rachel most likely used him for his money, his biggest fear that he was only valuable for his income, which turned out to be true, I believe. When Rachel felt financially stable enough to head out on her own, she did. And now he's got to face that, maybe his deepest, darkest fear, which he had told her about and said that he was worried and self-conscious about it. And she reassured him during the marriage while her business was growing. When push came to shove, she left him. That is hard. That is not something easy to go through. It's not something fun. It sucks, especially when it's publicly. It's embarrassing. It probably produced a lot of shame in him. It just reconfirmed all of his greatest fears. But that's not what he's saying here. He's still avoiding that really gaping hole that he's calling a wound, and he's putting a Band-Aid over it and saying, I'm better, let me help you now. It ain't gonna work long term. This is pointless, but okay, we'll keep going.
It was Robitussin for my heart. And in a world where so many messages
I gotta get that one. Robitussin for my heart.
Will tell you the things that reinforce the thing that you were wounded by. Finding something that can be an antithesis of the messaging of the world or the messaging of what it means to be a good woman or a good man, what it means to be a good mom or a good dad, what it means to be good generally, is so influenced by marketing, is so influenced by a whole host of systemic forces that are so much bigger than any single one of us, that getting back to a place where the simplicity of this message of a higher power loving me before I've done a thing made all the rest of that noise quiet, at least for that hour and 15 minutes. That's why I was crying. And I just know, for me, my journey, I got to keep going back to that well, because my ability to feel lovable before I've accomplished anything or done anything is hard when I'm back in my peer group, when I'm in a relationship, when I'm like, there are things that just are triggers when I'm in the world that when I'm in my spiritual practice, they fade away. And so I don't know what it'll be for you, but one, if you need to hear a good word at a church today, I will tell you this: you ain't got to do a stinking thing to be loved by God. He loves you just as you are, just as broken as you are. He loves you like he loves me. And it makes me cry because
Dave,
I need to be loved. I want to be loved before I've had to do one single thing. And I am. And so are you. But two, doing the work of spending some time to understand why you, were you to be sitting inside of a sermon, might find yourself crying without explanation, could come back to your willingness to dig into your core wound. What is the thing that happened when you were young? Who was the person? What is the system? What was the circumstance? What was the traumatic event? Whatever it is that created for you some set of beliefs that, because of their existence, hamstrings you from fully making the empowered decisions that you'd hope to make, the decisions that would have you feeling most aligned and integrated into who you know yourself to be placed on this earth to be. If it's a spiritual practice, fantastic.
he's still repeating stuff from Pancake Gate, which is, who were you when you were placed here by God, from who you're supposed to be, and my purpose? It's just like, first of all, that let's just address the elephant in the room of that last comment. That was very uncomfortable to listen to. I'm not against men crying. I'm not against people crying. I just find it wholly uncomfortable, as he said, wholly uncomfortable listening to someone who is, to them, not obvious that they're struggling, but to probably the general listeners maybe clear that they're struggling, and just sort of dealing with that reality. It's hard to hear someone in pain when they're so convinced that they're not, or that they're, on the other side of it, when it just is sort of, to me, obvious that it's not. So that was hard to listen to. The second part, it just seems like he's very, again, right now, it's like he's on the train, like he was on the train of recovery and like rehab, and like that was the thing that fixed him. And now he's on the recovery and the train of church, and church is what's going to heal him and help him. I agree. I saw a comment come through. It was like, the best thing for these people, him specifically, get off of social media. Delete social media. Do not post. Delete your podcast and find a job, or do what you were doing with volunteering. If you don't need to work, freaking don't work. Chill, man. And just go to church, hang out with your kids, volunteer, and leave this behind. This will never end. As someone who makes content online, the search for validation and the search for and the judgment of views and what people say and comments, as much as you can be see it and go, okay, move forward. It's not easy. It's hard. And it's like, it's never gonna get easier, especially with how like he had his peak 2018, 2019. Unless something crazy happens, the festival's over, So you're just going to be pining for that feeling that you had standing in the audience or on the stage of a Rise conference. And can you live with that if that never comes? That's a question he's got to answer, I guess. And all this talking through stuff publicly, it's embarrassing. I hate to say that because it's a mean word, but it is embarrassing. And I think he needs to find in-person friends and family to find support in right now. And I think his life would greatly improve.
If it's therapy, fantastic. If it's a fitness community, fantastic. If it's, whatever it is.
It's not fantastic in a fitness community. Come on.
Because it's not easy work, but it is in real time for me, ending up to be pretty transformational and important work in me getting to be free from the way the wound intercedes in me making decisions that ultimately compromise some of the way that I have access to loving myself. Because when I don't think I'm lovable until I do a certain thing, I don't think I'm lovable as I am, and neither will you. All right, there you go. Thoughts after a church service. I hope that was helpful. I appreciate y'all, and I hope you're having a good Tuesday. We'll see you on Thursday for another episode of The Rise Together.
And maybe he doesn't delete I think he should personally delete his podcast, but maybe you just interview people. That's it. You go, okay, tell me about your business. Oh, wow, very interesting. If he needs the money and he's making money just to produce an episode every so often, run out the clock on that contract and just literally have people talk at you about their coaching programs and how successful they are. Why are we doing this like, I need to tell you about my tears that I had yesterday? That's the part that I'm like, this is unnecessary. And this is a bonus episode. Why? The fact that he thinks that was helpful to anybody, and maybe it was to somebody, who knows? I'm not, who can I say that was helpful for no one? But I think it's just more uncomfortable for the majority of people who are going to be listening to that, perhaps. I just feel like, as someone who's been obviously a very harsh critic, as I would say about myself, to them and the Hollis brand and Heidi and everything. As much as I'm a harsh critic, I listen to it a lot. I try to digest it a lot, and I try to put it within the context that maybe some of his other followers don't do. And from my perspective, as someone who's been invested in this storyline, it doesn't sound like he's doing great. That's all I have to say. And I feel like, again, like posting it, trying to get the validation, the downloads, it doesn't seem like that's something that's helping him, because he's been at this for years and has continued to, cry and all of that stuff without like the growth element, I think, that is probably necessary for like real healing, whatever that means to you. Anyway.